This might be shocking, but not all Vikings were pagans. Hi guys, what's up? My name is David and welcome back to my channel. I am a student of Scandinavian studies and I like to talk about misconceptions that people might have about the Viking Age. And I made a video before about symbols that are thought to be Viking but are not, and about the myth of horned helmets. And there's one more thing that people tend to believe about the Vikings, which is understandable but also wildly incorrect, is the fact that some people think all Vikings were pagans. And of course, this is absolutely not true, but I want to unpack it in a way that doesn't talk down upon the people that do believe this. I just want to show you that this is not the case and why this isn't the case. So, many people in the 21st century like Vikings because of the ideals that are portrayed in media through either Vikings TV series or other Viking-related media that exists, like games, music, other series and films. And generally their Vikings are portrayed as pagan, as this binary opposite to Christianity. But when you think about it, this is very weird because Christianity was actually introduced to Scandinavia in the Viking Age. So surely it is impossible for all people there to be pagan. And then some people might argue that, yeah, but Vikings specifically were pagan. And when we look at the term Viking and what exactly the Viking is, what the Viking Age means, it is not a description of nationality or religion. It is a sort of job or activity descriptor, someone who went abroad from generally Scandinavia to either the west or the east and raided or pillaged or traded with the places that they went to. And there's a lot of stereotypes about who exactly a Viking is, like that they're all men, all white, all from Scandinavia, all pagan. But this is not the case. So the Viking Age is generally considered to have started in 793 with the attack on Lindisfarne Monastery in England. So of course it started with an attack on a monastery, and yes, those people who attacked this monastery were clearly not Christian. But this is just a symbolic event, one of the most known ones. It doesn't mean that things like this didn't happen before or after, just this one was written down in the chronicles, and that's why we know it. And clearly these first raiders were not Christian and they were not really interested in being against Christianity. They just saw a monastery where a lot of unarmed people lived and yet tons of wealth were to be found. So obviously those were material and economic reasons for raiding a monastery. It wasn't because they were so against Christianity. They just wanted gold. It's as simple as that. Of course, it isn't. I'm just simplifying it, but that was probably one of the main motivators for why the Viking Age happened in general. So, you have to remember this because these economic and material incentives are important. Because this is also one of the main reasons why the countries of Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, and later also Iceland, actually converted to Christianity for economic and for just safety purposes. So let's start with Denmark. It is on the mainland of Europe and it borders with the Sea of Hamburg-Bremen, which was at the time expanding its religious and political power onto Scandinavia. Missionaries were sent to Scandinavia, for example, Ansgar, who visited Birka in the 9th century without a lot of success, but just because the whole country wasn't converted does not mean that some people did not convert. Some people liked the ideas of Christianity and converted. It should be noted that Christianization was not violent in most cases when it comes to the Scandinavian lands. Either kings or lay people converted because they saw either economic or personal incentives in converting to Christianity. And this conversion to Christianity did not stop people from wanting to travel abroad, see new lands, conquer them, trade with people. So the idea of Vikings did not stop with the introduction of Christianity to these countries. And another thing that is like linked with paganism in popular culture is runes and runestones. Well, yes, runes were used before the Viking Age and after the Viking Age. It's not some kind of pagan symbol. It was just an alphabet, most likely inspired by the Latin one. And a lot of runestones are actually Christian. So runestones actually also come from before the Viking Age, but ornamented runestones are thought to be inspired mostly by the one made by King Harald Bluetooth of Denmark. Yes, that's where the name Bluetooth comes from. He made a runestone in which he says that he united Denmark and Norway and made all of the Danes Christians. So here we have a mention of Scandinavian unity because he says to have united Denmark and Norway, but he also claims to have made all of the Danes Christians. Of course, this is not true. You, as a king, cannot personally convert everyone in your country, but the fact that he felt the need to claim something like this does suggest that, you know, Christianity was in. And so this runestone was carved in the 10th century, and not only does it talk about Christianity, it literally features an ornamentation of Jesus Christ. So a lot of runestones after that were inspired by this one and are Christian, not just because they were made in a period where Christianity was the dominant religion, but they contain inherently Christian messages. And to link this to Vikings, there's actually two very interesting runestones that mention people going abroad and contain Christian motives. So we have runestone VS18 and VS19 from Sweden, and VS18 contains the inscription, Gunvaldr had the stone raised in memory of Geirfastr, his son, who was a good man, and traveled to England. May God help his soul. And then the other one, VS19, mentions the same guy, and says Gunvaldr had the stone raised in memory of Orm, his stepson, a good, valiant man, who traveled to the east with Ingvar. May God help his soul. So, two things. First one mentions traveling to England. That is something that most people associate with Viking voyages, and this is clearly mentioned on this runestone. The other part, may God help his soul. This is not a reference to some god. No, this is specifically the Christian god. So here we have a Viking, someone from Scandinavia who traveled to England, who is commemorated on a stone that says, God help his soul. And then the other one traveled to the east with Ingvar. This is a very common motive, and there's a lot of runestones called Ingvar stones, which was a not very successful voyage to the east. This also shows that the Viking Age is not only voyages to the west, but also to the east. And here again it says, may God help his soul, the Christian God, help his Christian soul. So this is probably the most obvious example of how not all Vikings were pagans. I will make an entire video about runestones specifically because I love runestones. But before I wrap this up, I just want to also mention things that are not Christianity, because even the Vikings that were not Christians did not all have the same religion. The idea of one coherent Old Norse religion is a very modern one that assumes that this worldview functioned in the same way that Christianity did. But of course there were local variants, and before there was some kind of big national unity, of course people did not believe in the same things, and people would have had different opinions towards new religions. And one very fun thing is the syncretism that happens, because a lot of the times people were not necessarily converting to Christianity, but just adding the Christian god to their inventory of the gods that they already believed in. It's like, Obviously, if you are polytheistic, if you believe in more than one god, then of course you can add one extra. But the other way around, if you just believe there is one, you don't really have that mental space to understand why people would believe in different gods when you think yours is the only one. So in a way, polytheism makes space for more acceptance, and because the Vikings also had connections to the Arab world, there were people like Ibn al-Tartushi who traveled to Denmark to Hedeby, who was a merchant from Cordoba in southern Spain, which was at that time Muslim, and of course people like Ibn Fadlan who described the Rus, so people of Scandinavian descent in what is now Ukraine. And yeah, so of course the Scandinavians also had some connections to the Islamic world. There are Islamic coins found in Scandinavia, and there's also one very particular interesting thing. In Historiska Museet in Stockholm, there is a figurine of a Buddha found dated to the Viking Age. So not only did those Viking Age Scandinavians have connections with Christianity, but also with Islam and even Buddhism. So to think that everyone, the entire duration of the Viking Age, just believed in the specific set of Old Norse gods is just wrong. And it is understandable that people think that, because that is the way that it is presented in popular media. But it is simply not the case. And if you didn't know this, then that is absolutely valid. And I hope you learned something more today. If you still have any questions, feel free to reach out to me in the comments or DM me on Instagram, as some people do. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Once again, I will return to the runestones because I can talk about those for ages. And I will see you next time. Bye bye.